Sarah Chin stood in the sterile hallway of City General Hospital, clutching a wrinkled check in her trembling hands. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows on her tired face as she stared at the payment window. 3 months had passed since her grandmother's funeral, and the inheritance money felt like both a blessing and a burden. $50,000 was more money than Sarah had ever seen in her bank account, but it came with the weight of loss and responsibility. Her mother, Linda, sat in the oncology waiting room just down the hall, preparing for another round of chemotherapy. The cancer had been aggressive, and the medical bills were mounting faster than Sarah could manage on her graphic design freelance income. Her small apartment in Brooklyn barely covered her own expenses, let alone the crushing weight of hospital costs that insurance refused to cover completely. "Next patient, please," called the tired voice from behind the payment window. Sarah approached the counter, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. The woman behind the glass looked exhausted, probably nearing the end of a long shift. Her name tag read Patricia, and her kind eyes held the patience of someone who dealt with worried families every day. "I need to make a payment for Linda Chun," Sarah said, sliding the check under the glass partition. "Room 304. It's for her cancer treatment." Patricia's fingers moved quickly across her keyboard, scanning multiple screens. She paused, looking confused for a moment, then continued typing. "I see several accounts with similar names. Let me verify the details." Sarah provided her mother's birth date and insurance information, watching as Patricia's eyebrows furrowed in concentration. The waiting area behind Sarah filled with the quiet murmur of other families dealing with their own medical crises. A young father rocked a crying baby, while an elderly man filled out insurance forms with shaking hands. "Okay, here we go," Patricia said, processing the payment. $50,000 toward the account. "That's very generous of you." Relief flooded through Sarah's chest as she watched the transaction complete. This payment would cover her mother's treatment for the next several months, giving them breathing room to focus on healing rather than finances. She tucked the receipt into her purse and walked back toward the oncology wing with lighter steps than she'd had in weeks. Her mother was dozing in the uncomfortable chair when Sarah returned, the four-drip slowly delivering medication that might save her life. Linda's once thick black hair had thinned considerably, but her spirit remained strong. She opened her eyes as Sarah sat down beside her. "How did it go, sweetheart?" Linda asked, her voice hoarse from the treatment. "All taken care of," Sarah replied, squeezing her mother's hand gently. "You don't need to worry about the bills anymore. Just focus on getting better." Linda smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "Your grandmother would be so proud of how you're using her money. She always said you had the biggest heart in the family." Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon with her mother, reading magazines and sharing stories about happier times. As evening approached, she helped Linda to the car and drove her home to the small house in Queens where Sarah had grown up. The familiar neighborhood felt comforting after the clinical atmosphere of the hospital. 2 weeks passed quietly. Sarah threw herself into her design work, taking on extra projects to rebuild her savings. Her small home office was cluttered with sketches and color samples as she worked on a branding project for a local restaurant. The stress of the medical bills had been lifted, allowing her to focus on creativity again. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while Sarah was drinking coffee and reviewing client emails. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was Patricia from the hospital billing department. "Miss Chun, I'm calling about a discrepancy we discovered in your payment from 2 weeks ago," Patricia said, her voice apologetic but urgent. "I'm afraid there was an error in our system." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What kind of error?" "Your payment was accidentally applied to the wrong account. We have another patient with a very similar name. And, in the confusion, your $50,000 payment went toward their bill instead of your mother's account." The coffee cup slipped from Sarah's hand, crashing to the floor and sending hot liquid across her kitchen tiles. She stared at the spreading puddle, unable to process what she was hearing. "I don't understand," Sarah managed to say. "The money was for my mother's cancer treatment. Linda Chun, room 304. "I know. And I'm so sorry for the confusion. The payment went to an account for Elena Rivera. She was in room 306, just down the hall. Her daughter was having emergency surgery that same day." Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her mind racing. So my mother's bill is still unpaid? Unfortunately, yes. And, Miss Chun, there's another complication. The Rivera family has already been discharged. The payment covered their entire outstanding balance, and they've left the hospital. We're having difficulty locating them to reverse the transaction. The room seemed to spin around Sarah as the full impact hit her. The inheritance money was gone, paid toward a stranger's medical bills, while her mother's cancer treatment remained unfunded. She thought about the chemotherapy appointment scheduled for the following week, the medications her mother needed, the specialist consultations that were already planned. How long do you think it will take to fix this? Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer wouldn't be encouraging. Patricia's silence spoke volumes before she responded. These situations are complicated, Miss Chun. It could take weeks or even months to trace the payment and coordinate a refund. The hospital billing department has to work with insurance companies, legal departments, and the Rivera family themselves. There's no guarantee of timing. After hanging up the phone, Sarah sat in her kitchen surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, feeling more lost than she had since her grandmother's death. She thought about calling her mother, but couldn't bear to deliver this devastating news over the phone. Linda was having a good day today, planning to tend her small garden and visit with neighbors. Sarah couldn't destroy that peace with her careless mistake. The afternoon was spent researching her options. She called her bank, spoke with hospital administrators, and even contacted a lawyer who specialized in medical billing disputes. Every conversation led to the same conclusion. The process would be slow, expensive, and uncertain. Meanwhile, her mother's cancer wouldn't wait for bureaucratic solutions. That evening, Sarah drove to her mother's house with a heavy heart. Linda was in the kitchen making tea, humming an old song that Sarah remembered from childhood. The normalcy of the scene made Sarah's task even more difficult. "Mom, we need to talk about something," Sarah began, settling at the familiar kitchen table where she'd done homework and shared countless meals. Linda's expression shifted immediately to concern as she recognized the seriousness in Sarah's tone. She poured 2 cups of tea and sat down across from her daughter. Sarah explained the hospital's mistake, watching her mother's face cycle through confusion, disappointment, and, finally, a resigned sadness that broke Sarah's heart. Linda reached across the table and took her daughter's hands in her own. "These things happen, sweetheart," Linda said quietly. "We'll figure something out. Maybe the hospital has payment plans or charity programs." But Sarah knew the reality was harsher than her mother's optimistic words. The cancer treatment was expensive and time-sensitive. Delays could be dangerous, and the hospital's charity care program had a long waiting list. They were back to the desperate financial situation they'd thought was resolved. That night, Sarah lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, wondering about the Rivera family. Who were they? What kind of emergency surgery had required $50,000? Were they grateful for the unexpected financial relief, or were they as confused as Sarah had been initially? She imagined a family much like her own, dealing with a medical crisis and overwhelming bills. Perhaps a parent had made the same desperate calculations Sarah had been making, wondering how to pay for life-saving treatment. The thought that her accidental payment might have provided crucial help to another family in need offered a small comfort in her current despair. Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into work with desperate intensity. She reached out to former clients, applied for rush projects, and even considered taking a second job. Her small savings account, already depleted by months of supporting her mother, couldn't absorb the loss of the inheritance money. The graphic design projects that once excited her now felt like mechanical tasks focused solely on generating income. She worked late into the nights, her eyes burning from computer screens as she calculated and recalculated how long it would take to save enough money for her mother's continued treatment. A week after the devastating phone call, Sarah visited her mother for their weekly grocery shopping trip. Linda had insisted on maintaining this routine despite her illness, saying that normal activities helped her feel human rather than just a patient. They walked slowly through the aisles of the neighborhood market, Linda leaning on Sarah's arm for support. "I've been thinking about your grandmother's money," Linda said as they selected vegetables. "She would have wanted it to help someone, even if it wasn't us. Maybe this happened for a reason." Sarah admired her mother's ability to find meaning in their misfortune, but she struggled to share that perspective. The practical reality of unpaid medical bills and looming treatment deadlines felt too immediate for philosophical acceptance. As they stood in the checkout line, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. She glanced at it briefly, expecting another marketing message or wrong number text. Instead, she found something that made her heart skip a beat. "Is this Sarah Chen? This is Marcus Rivera. I believe you accidentally paid my daughter's medical bill. I'd like to speak with you." Sarah stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. Marcus Rivera. The Rivera family from the hospital. Someone had found her, and they knew about the payment mistake. Her hands trembled slightly as she showed the message to her mother. Linda's eyes widened as she read the text. "Well," she said with a small smile, "maybe things are about to change." Sarah's mind raced with questions. How had this Marcus Rivera found her contact information? What did he want to discuss? Was this the beginning of a solution to their financial crisis, or would it complicate an already difficult situation? As they loaded groceries into Sarah's car, she made a decision that would change the direction of her life. She typed a simple response to the mysterious text message. "Yes, this is Sarah. I think we need to talk." The response came within minutes, suggesting they meet the following day at a coffee shop in Manhattan. Sarah agreed, though she had no idea what to expect from this encounter. The Rivera family was clearly from a different world than her own if they could afford the kind of medical procedure that required $50,000. That evening, Sarah researched Marcus Rivera online, discovering information that left her both hopeful and intimidated. Marcus was the CEO of Rivera Tech Industries, a successful software company that specialized in medical technology. His company had developed several innovative healthcare applications and had recently gone public with significant success. The photos she found showed a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and graying temples, often pictured at charity events and business conferences. Articles described him as a philanthropist who had donated millions to children's hospitals and educational programs. This was clearly someone with the resources to immediately resolve the payment mistake, if he chose to do so. But Sarah also felt a growing anxiety about meeting someone from such a different economic background. Would he blame her for the hospital's error? Would he see her as some kind of opportunist trying to take advantage of his family's medical crisis? The uncertainty kept her awake most of the night, alternating between hope and worry. The next morning, Sarah selected her most professional outfit and took the subway into Manhattan. The coffee shop Marcus had suggested was in an upscale neighborhood near his company's headquarters, the kind of place where a single cup of coffee cost more than Sarah typically spent on lunch. She arrived early and chose a table near the window, watching the bustling street outside while trying to calm her nerves. Business people hurried past in expensive suits, talking on phones, and carrying briefcases that probably cost more than Sarah's rent. She felt out of place, but reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. The payment mistake had been exactly that, a mistake made by the hospital's billing system. At exactly 3 o'clock, a man entered the coffee shop and looked around with the careful attention of someone meeting a stranger. Sarah recognized him immediately from the photos she'd seen online, though he looked more tired and slightly older than his corporate headshots. Marcus Rivera was tall with an athletic build, dressed in a dark suit that was clearly expensive but not ostentatious. Their eyes met across the cafe, and he approached her table with a hesitant smile. "Sarah Chun." She stood up, extending her hand. "Mr. Rivera, thank you for reaching out." As they settled into their seats and ordered coffee, Sarah studied the man who had become an unexpected part of her life story. Marcus had the bearing of someone accustomed to making important decisions, but there was also something vulnerable in his expression that suggested recent emotional strain. "I want to start by explaining how I found you," Marcus said, his voice warm but serious. "When the hospital called to inform us about the payment error, they provided your contact information so we could coordinate the refund. I hope you don't mind that I reached out directly." Sarah felt a wave of relief that this wasn't some kind of stalking situation. "I'm glad you did. This whole thing has been very confusing and stressful." Marcus nodded, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Marcus Rivera stood beside his daughter's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest as she slept. 3 days had passed since Elena's successful heart transplant surgery, and The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery. The new heart was functioning well, her body was accepting the transplant, and the dangerous post-operative period was showing all the right signs. But Marcus couldn't shake the memory of the terrifying hours before the surgery, when their insurance company had delivered the devastating news that Elena had reached her lifetime coverage maximum. The years of medical treatments, hospitalizations, and specialist consultations for her congenital heart defect had accumulated into a staggering sum that exceeded their policy limits. Elena stirred slightly in her sleep, and Marcus reached over to adjust her blanket. At 15, she looked so young and fragile, surrounded by the medical equipment that was monitoring her recovery. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face had more color than it had shown in months. The surgery had been successful, but the financial stress had nearly broken their family apart. Marcus's phone vibrated with a text from his wife, Carmen, who had gone home to shower and check on their younger son, Diego. "How's our girl doing? I'll be back in an hour with her favorite books." He typed back quickly, "Still sleeping peacefully. Vitals look good. Take your time." Carmen had been his rock throughout Elena's illness, but the financial pressure had strained their marriage in ways Marcus had never anticipated. They had already mortgaged their house, liquidated most of their savings, and borrowed against his company's assets. The $50,000 gap between Elena's surgical costs and their insurance coverage had seemed insurmountable. Rivera Tech Industries was successful, but most of Marcus's wealth was tied up in the company's growth and development. The business had gone public 6 months earlier, but his stock options were still vested and couldn't be accessed without significant penalties. He had been preparing to sell his personal stake in the company at a substantial loss when the mysterious payment had appeared on Elena's hospital account. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Patricia Reeves, Elena's cardiac surgeon, entered the room with a warm smile. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the confident demeanor of someone who had performed thousands of life-saving procedures. "Good afternoon, Marcus. How are you holding up?" she asked, checking Elena's chart on her tablet. "Better now that she's through the surgery," Marcus replied. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for our family." Dr. Reeves had been Elena's surgeon for 3 years, guiding them through the complex process of getting on the transplant list and preparing for the eventual surgery. She understood the emotional and financial toll that long-term medical care could take on families. "She's responding beautifully to the new heart," Dr. Reeves said, reviewing the latest test results. "Her body is accepting the transplant better than we dared hope. In a few more days, we'll be able to move her out of the ICU and into a regular recovery room." Marcus felt tears of relief gathering in his eyes. For over 2 years, they had lived with the constant fear that Elena might not survive long enough to receive a donor heart. The waiting list was long, and her condition had been deteriorating steadily. "Doctor, I have to ask you something," Marcus said, lowering his voice so he wouldn't wake Elena. "That payment that appeared on our account right before the surgery, do you know anything about how that happened?" Dr. Reeves paused in her chart review, looking thoughtful. "The billing department mentioned there was some kind of error with payment processing. A patient in another room had intended to pay toward their own family member's account, but the payment was accidentally applied to Elena's bill instead." Marcus had been wondering about this mysterious benefactor since the hospital's billing department had called to explain the situation. $50,000 had appeared on Elena's account just hours before her surgery, covering the exact amount their insurance wouldn't pay. The timing had been nothing short of miraculous. "Do you know anything about the family who made the payment?" Marcus asked. "I shouldn't share patient information, Dr. Reeves said carefully, "but I can tell you that they're dealing with their own serious medical situation. The payment was supposed to cover cancer treatment for an elderly woman, and now their family is facing the same financial crisis you were facing before the error occurred." The weight of this information hit Marcus like a physical blow. Another family was now suffering financially because of an accident that had saved his daughter's life. He thought about the desperation he had felt just days earlier, wondering how he could possibly come up with $50,000 in time for Elena's surgery. "Is there any way I can contact them?" Marcus asked. "I need to make this right. They shouldn't have to suffer because of a billing mistake." Dr. Reeves hesitated, clearly torn between patient privacy concerns and her understanding of Marcus's desire to help. The billing department might be able to facilitate contact if both families consent. These situations are unusual, but not unprecedented. After the doctor left, Marcus sat in the chair beside Elena's bed and researched everything he could about medical billing errors and patient rights. The process for reversing accidental payments was complex and time-consuming, often taking months to resolve through official channels. Meanwhile, the other family was probably facing the same desperate situation his family had been in just days earlier. Elena woke up as the afternoon sun slanted through the hospital room windows. Her eyes were still cloudy from medication, but she managed a small smile when she saw her father. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed that morning. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Marcus asked, taking her hand gently. "Different," Elena said, pressing her hand to her chest. "I can feel it beating. It feels stronger than before." Marcus had been dreading this conversation, but he knew Elena deserved to understand what had happened. At 15, she was old enough to comprehend the financial realities of her medical care, though he had tried to shield her from the worst of their money worries. "Elena, I need to tell you something about how we were able to pay for your surgery," Marcus began, explaining the mysterious payment and the billing error that had made her operation possible. Elena listened with growing concern as she understood that another family was now facing financial hardship because of her treatment. Despite her own recovery needs, her first thought was for the strangers who had unknowingly helped save her life. "Dad, we have to find them," Elena said, struggling to sit up in her bed. "We have to pay them back and help them like they helped us." Marcus felt a surge of pride in his daughter's compassion, even while she was recovering from major surgery. Elena had always been empathetic, but her own experience with serious illness had made her especially sensitive to other people's suffering. "I'm already working on it," Marcus assured her. "The hospital is going to help me contact them." That evening, Marcus called the hospital's billing department and spoke with Patricia, the clerk who had processed the original payment. She explained that the payment had come from a young woman named Sarah Chun, who was trying to cover her mother's cancer treatment costs. "Mr. Rivera, I have to tell you, Miss Chun was devastated when she learned about the error," Patricia said. "Her mother's chemotherapy treatments are already behind schedule because of the payment mix-up. The family is in a very difficult situation." Marcus felt a growing sense of urgency to reach out to Sarah Chun and her family. He understood exactly the fear and desperation they were experiencing, having lived through those same emotions just days earlier. "Can you provide me with her contact information?" Marcus asked. "I'd like to reach out to her directly." Patricia explained the hospital's privacy policies, but agreed to contact Sarah and ask if she would be willing to speak with Marcus directly. Within an hour, she called back with Sarah's phone number and permission to make contact. That night, Marcus lay awake in the hotel room near the hospital where he'd been staying during Elena's recovery. Carmen had taken Diego home to maintain some normalcy for their younger son, but she planned to return the following day. The room was quiet except for the distant sounds of city traffic and the occasional siren. Marcus stared at Sarah Chen's phone number, written on a piece of hotel stationery. How do you reach out to a complete stranger whose accidental generosity had saved your child's life? What words could possibly express the gratitude he felt, while also acknowledging the hardship his family's gain had caused hers? He thought about Elena sleeping peacefully in her hospital room, her new heart beating strongly in her chest. Without Sarah's payment, the surgery might have been delayed while they scrambled to find the money. Every day of delay increased the risk that Elena's condition would deteriorate beyond the point where transplant surgery was viable. At the same time, he thought about Sarah's mother, probably lying in another hospital bed somewhere, wondering how her daughter would manage to pay for cancer treatment. The cruel irony that one family's salvation had become another family's crisis felt like a weight on his conscience. The next morning, Marcus visited Elena before sending his first text message to Sarah. His daughter was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in months. The color in her cheeks was natural rather than the artificial flush of fever, and her breathing was easy and unlabored. "Did you reach out to the family who helped us?" Elena asked immediately. Marcus showed her the text message he had composed and rewritten several times. "Is this Sarah Chen? This is Marcus Rivera. I believe you accidentally paid my daughter's medical bill. I'd like to speak with you. That's good, Elena said, reviewing the message. But, Dad, when you talk to her, make sure she knows how grateful we are. She saved my life, even if she didn't mean to. Marcus sent the message and received a response within a few hours. Sarah Chun was willing to meet with him the following day at a coffee shop in Manhattan. The brevity of her response suggested she was cautious about the meeting, which Marcus completely understood. He spent the rest of the day researching Sarah Chun online, trying to understand who this accidental angel was who had intervened in his family's crisis. Her social media profile showed a young woman who worked as a freelance graphic designer, living in a modest Brooklyn apartment. Her posts were infrequent and mostly professional, showcasing design work for small businesses and local organizations. The contrast between their economic situations was stark. Marcus lived in a large house in an affluent suburb, drove expensive cars, and had built a successful technology company from the ground up. Sarah lived in a one-bedroom apartment, took public transportation, and was clearly struggling to support herself and her mother on a regular freelance income. But, despite their different backgrounds, Marcus recognized something in Sarah's online presence that resonated with him. Her design work showed creativity and attention to detail, and the few personal posts he found revealed someone who cared deeply about her family and community. She had volunteered for local charity events and had created pro bono marketing materials for nonprofit organizations. The evening before their meeting, Marcus called his business partner and close friend, David Kim, to discuss the situation. David had been his roommate in college and had co-founded Rivera Tech Industries with Marcus 10 years earlier. He was one of the few people who understood both Marcus's business acumen and his personal values. "You're really planning to give this woman $50,000 just like that?" David asked over the phone. "David, her accidental payment saved Elena's life," Marcus replied. "Without that money appearing when it did, we would have had to delay the surgery while we figured out financing. Elena might not have survived the wait." David was quiet for a moment, processing the emotional weight of the situation. He had watched Elena grow up, had been at the hospital during several of her medical crises, and understood how close the Rivera family had come to losing her. "Okay, but 50,000 is just the beginning, right?" David said. "If this woman's mother has cancer, their ongoing medical costs are probably going to be enormous. Are you prepared for what this might turn into?" Marcus had been thinking about exactly that question. Repaying Sarah's $50,000 was an obvious moral obligation, but what about the broader situation? If her mother's cancer treatment required hundreds of thousands of dollars over months or years, was he prepared to help with those costs as well? "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I just know I have to meet her and see what kind of help she needs. Elena is alive because of what Sarah did, whether intentional or not. That means something." The next morning, Marcus dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a business suit that was professional but not ostentatious. He wanted to make a good impression without emphasizing the economic differences between himself and Sarah. The coffee shop he had suggested was in a neutral location, upscale enough to be comfortable, but not so expensive as to be intimidating. He arrived early and chose a table where he could watch for Sarah's arrival. The neighborhood was busy with lunch-hour foot traffic, business people, and tourists mixing on the sidewalks outside. Marcus found himself studying every young woman who passed by, wondering if she might be the person who had unknowingly changed his family's life. At exactly 3 o'clock, a young Asian woman entered the coffee shop and looked around uncertainly. Marcus recognized her immediately from the photos he'd seen online, though she looked more tired and stressed than her social media images had suggested. Sarah Chun was petite with long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a cardigan that looked professional but not expensive. Their eyes met across the cafe, and Marcus stood up to approach her. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind dozens of times, but actually facing the woman who had saved his daughter's life left him feeling unexpectedly emotional. "Sarah Chun," he said, extending his hand. "Mr. Rivera, thank you for reaching out," she replied, her handshake firm despite her obvious nervousness. As they sat down and ordered coffee, Marcus studied Sarah's face, looking for clues about her personality and character. She had intelligent eyes and the slightly worn expression of someone dealing with ongoing stress. Her clothes were clean and neat but showed signs of frequent wear, and her purse was a practical canvas bag rather than a designer accessory. I want to start by explaining how I found you, Marcus began, wanting to put her at ease about his contact information. When the hospital called to inform us about the payment error, they provided your contact information so we could coordinate the refund. I hope you don't mind that I reached out directly. Sarah's visible relief confirmed that she had been worried about privacy and safety issues. I'm glad you did. This whole thing has been very confusing and stressful. Marcus nodded and began to share the story of Elena's illness and surgery, watching Sarah's expression change as she understood the life-or-death nature of the situation her accidental payment had impacted. He explained about Elena's congenital heart defect, the years on the transplant waiting list, and the insurance crisis that had threatened to derail her surgery. The surgery was successful, Marcus continued, but our insurance had reached its lifetime maximum. We were facing the possibility of financial ruin, or worse, having to delay critical post-operative care. When that payment appeared on our account, it felt like a miracle. He watched tears gather in Sarah's eyes as Sarah stared at the check in her hands, unable to fully process what had just happened. $500,000. Marcus Rivera had written her a check for 10 times the amount of her accidental payment, and he had done it as casually as someone might tip a waiter. The coffee shop around them buzzed with normal afternoon activity, but Sarah felt like she was experiencing the moment from inside a bubble of disbelief. Mr. Rivera, I can't accept this, Sarah said, trying to hand the check back across the small table. $50,000 to replace what I accidentally paid. Yes, that's fair. But this is too much. Marcus gently pushed the check back toward her, his expression serious but kind. Sarah, please call me Marcus. And, yes, you can accept this. You saved my daughter's life. There's no amount of money that could truly repay that gift. Sarah looked around the upscale coffee shop, suddenly, very aware of the differences between her world and Marcus's. The other customers were dressed in expensive business attire, speaking quietly into phones about deals and meetings that probably involved more money than Sarah had ever imagined. She felt out of place holding a check that represented more wealth than her family had accumulated in multiple generations. But I didn't mean to save anyone's life, Sarah protested. It was a mistake. The hospital mixed up our accounts. I was just trying to pay my mother's medical bills. Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. Intent doesn't matter, Sarah. The result is what matters. Elena is alive and recovering because your payment made her surgery possible when it was needed most. Do you understand what that means to a parent? Sarah thought about her own mother, lying in the chemotherapy chair with her eyes closed, trusting that Sarah would somehow manage the impossible financial burden of cancer treatment. She thought about the sleepless nights she'd spent calculating and recalculating their expenses, the freelance projects she'd taken on at impossible deadlines, the constant fear that she wouldn't be able to provide what her mother needed. I understand, Sarah said quietly. But accepting this much money from a stranger feels wrong. We barely know each other. Marcus smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. Then, let's get to know each other. Tell me about your work as a graphic designer. Tell me about your mother. Tell me what your life is like. Over the next 2 hours, their formal meeting transformed into something more like a genuine conversation. Sarah found herself sharing details about her design business, her struggles to find steady clients, and her dreams of eventually opening her own creative agency. Marcus listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about her work process and the challenges of freelance life. Your portfolio online is impressive, Marcus said, pulling up her website on his phone. This branding work for the community center shows real creativity and strategic thinking. How did you develop your design skills? Sarah felt a flush of pride as she explained her self-taught journey through online courses and design communities. She had never been able to afford formal art school, but her passion for visual communication had driven her to master complex software and design principles through determination and countless late-night practice sessions. I've always been drawn to the way good design can tell a story, Sarah explained. A successful logo or website doesn't just look pretty. It communicates something essential about the business or organization it represents. Marcus nodded, clearly engaged by her explanation. That's exactly the kind of thinking my company needs. Rivera Tech Industries develops medical software, but we've struggled to communicate the human impact of our technology. Our marketing materials are too technical and don't connect emotionally with potential users. Sarah found herself leaning forward, intrigued by the challenge Marcus was describing. Medical technology marketing is tricky because you're often dealing with life or death situations, but you can't be exploitative or manipulative. The design has to build trust while also conveying innovation and reliability. Exactly, Marcus said, his excitement growing. We've hired 3 different marketing agencies, and they all approach our products like they're selling cars or smartphones. They don't understand that when a doctor is choosing software for patient care, they're making decisions that could save lives. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone buzzing with a call from the hospital. Sarah watched his expression change as he answered, clearly receiving an update about Elena's condition. That's wonderful news, Marcus said into the phone. We'll be there in an hour. He hung up and turned to Sarah with a broad smile. Elena is being moved out of the ICU today. Her recovery is ahead of schedule. Sarah felt genuine happiness for this family she barely knew. That's amazing. She must be so relieved. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then made what appeared to be an impulsive decision. Sarah, would you like to meet her? I know it might seem strange, but Elena has been asking about you ever since I told her about the payment mix-up. She wants to thank you personally. The suggestion caught Sarah off guard. Meeting the girl whose life had been saved by her accidental payment felt both meaningful and overwhelming. But something in Marcus's expression told her this meeting was important to Elena, not just to him. If you think it would be okay, I'd like to meet her, Sarah said. The subway ride to the hospital gave Sarah time to process the surreal direction her day had taken. That morning, she had been a struggling freelance designer facing financial ruin because of a hospital billing error. Now she was carrying a check for $500,000 and heading to meet the teenage girl whose life had been saved by her mistake. Marcus seemed to sense her nervousness as they walked through the hospital corridors. Elena is going to love you, he said reassuringly. She's been through a lot, but her spirit is incredible. She's already talking about how she wants to help other families going through similar situations. Elena's new room was bright and cheerful, with windows overlooking the city and colorful get-well cards covering every available surface. The girl in the bed looked much healthier than Sarah had expected, with clear eyes and rosy cheeks that spoke of a body finally receiving adequate oxygen. Elena, this is Sarah Chun, Marcus said, making the introduction. The woman I told you about. Elena's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire appearance. Despite being connected to various monitoring devices, she projected an energy and warmth that immediately put Sarah at ease. Sarah, I can't believe you're here, Elena said, struggling to sit up straighter in her bed. Dad told me what you did for us. I don't know how to thank you. Sarah approached the bed, moved by Elena's enthusiasm despite her recent surgery. I'm just glad you're okay. Your father told me the surgery went well. Better than well, Elena said, pressing her hand to her chest. I can breathe normally for the first time in years. I can walk upstairs without getting dizzy. It's like I have a whole new life, and it's because of you. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as she understood the full impact of her accidental payment. This wasn't just about money or medical bills. It was about a 15-year-old girl getting the chance to live a normal teenage life. Elena, I have to tell you something, Sarah said, sitting down in the chair beside the bed. When I found out about the payment mistake, I was angry and scared. My mother has cancer, and that money was supposed to pay for her treatment. I was focused on my own family's problems. Elena's expression grew serious as she listened. But you're not angry anymore. How can I be angry when I see how much the surgery meant to you and your family? Sarah replied, My mother always taught me that sometimes good things happen in unexpected ways. Maybe this wasn't really a mistake. Elena reached out and took Sarah's hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone recovering from major surgery. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. I'd love to meet her sometime. The suggestion sparked an idea in Sarah's mind. Her mother had been struggling with the isolation that came with cancer treatment, spending long days at home with limited energy for social activities. Meeting Elena might be exactly the kind of positive distraction Linda needed. Actually, I think she'd love to meet you too, Sarah said. She's been worried about me dealing with all the stress of her medical bills. Knowing that our situation helped your family might make her feel better about everything we've been going through. Marcus watched this exchange between his daughter and Sarah with growing amazement. What had started as a formal meeting to resolve a financial error was evolving into something that looked like the beginning of a genuine friendship. Sarah, can I ask you something? Elena said, her tone becoming more serious. What's it like having a parent who's really sick? I mean, I've been the sick one in our family, but I've never had to watch someone I love go through something scary and not be able to fix it. The question revealed a maturity beyond Elena's 15 years, shaped by her own experience with serious illness. Sarah considered how to answer honestly without frightening this young girl who was just beginning her own recovery. It's one of the hardest things I've ever experienced, Sarah said truthfully. You feel helpless a lot of the time, and you have to be strong even when you don't feel strong. But you also learn how precious every good day is, and you appreciate things you used to take for granted. Elena nodded thoughtfully. That's how I felt when I was waiting for a donor heart. Every day was scary, but it also made me notice beautiful things I might have missed otherwise. Like the way sunlight looks different colors at different times of day, or how my little brother's laugh sounds exactly like my dad's did when he was young. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion as he listened to his daughter articulate experiences he hadn't realized she'd been processing. Elena's illness had forced their entire family to confront mortality and uncertainty in ways that most people her age never had to face. Elena, you're very wise, Sarah said with genuine admiration. I think you and my mother would understand each other well. She's been finding meaning in small moments too. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Reeves, who entered the room with Elena's latest test results. She greeted Marcus warmly and looked curiously at Sarah, clearly wondering about the identity of this new visitor. Elena, your numbers continue to look excellent, Dr. Reeves announced, reviewing her tablet. If this progress continues, we might be able to discharge you home by the end of the week. Elena's excitement was infectious, and Sarah found herself clapping along with Marcus as they celebrated this milestone. The prospect of Elena going home represented the successful completion of a medical journey that had lasted for years and consumed her family's emotional and financial resources. Dr. Reeves, this is Sarah Chun, Marcus said, making introductions. She's the woman who accidentally made the payment that covered Elena's surgery costs. Dr. Reeves's expression shifted to recognition and gratitude. Miss Chen, I'm so pleased to meet you. The timing of your payment was nothing short of miraculous. We were in danger of having to delay Elena's surgery due to insurance complications. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the continued reminders of how significant her accidental payment had been. She was beginning to understand that the hospital billing error hadn't just helped one family. It had prevented a potential medical tragedy with lasting consequences. After Dr. Reeves left, Marcus suggested they move their conversation to the hospital's family lounge, giving Elena time to rest before dinner. The lounge was a comfortable space designed for long-term visitors, with soft furniture and large windows overlooking the city. Sarah, I want to talk more about the money situation, Marcus said once they were settled in quiet corner. I understand why the amount feels overwhelming, but I need you to understand something. Elena's surgery and recovery represent just the beginning of our family's medical journey. She'll need anti-rejection medications for the rest of her life, regular monitoring, and potential complications down the road. Sarah nodded, following his reasoning even as she continued to feel uncomfortable about the extraordinary generosity he was showing her family. What I'm trying to say is that your accidental payment didn't just cover one bill. It made Elena's entire future possible, Marcus continued. The money I'm offering you isn't charity or pity. It's recognition of the gift you gave us, intentional or not. Sarah looked out the window at the city bustling below them, trying to process the magnitude of what Marcus was telling her. She thought about her own mother's medical journey, the ongoing costs and uncertainties they faced, and the relief that Marcus's generosity could provide. Marcus, can I ask you something? Sarah said, turning back to face him. Why is this so important to you? You could just pay back the 50,000 and call it even. Why do you want to do more? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. When Elena was diagnosed with heart disease, I learned something about what really matters in life. All the business success and financial security I'd built didn't matter when I couldn't fix the one thing that threatened my daughter's life. He paused, looking back toward Elena's room down the hall. But money can matter when it comes to ensuring people get the medical care they need. Your family is facing the same impossible choices we were facing. If I have the resources to help, how can I not? Sarah felt her resistance to Marcus's generosity beginning to weaken as she understood his motivations more clearly. This wasn't about charity or obligation. It was about someone who had experienced medical crisis using his resources to prevent another family from suffering the same fear and desperation. There's one condition, Sarah said finally, making a decision that surprised even herself. If I accept your help with my mother's medical costs, I want to do something in return. You mentioned that your company needs better marketing and design. Let me work with you on that. Marcus's face brightened with interest. You want to work for Rivera Tech Industries? I want to work with you, Sarah corrected. As an independent contractor, helping you develop marketing materials that truly communicate the human impact of medical technology. You need someone who understands what it's like to be on the patient side of healthcare decisions. The proposal sparked excitement in Marcus's expression as he considered the possibilities. Sarah, that's brilliant. You're absolutely right that our marketing needs the perspective of someone who's actually lived through medical crises. When can we start? As they shook hands on their unconventional business partnership, Sarah realized that her accidental payment had set in motion a series of events that would transform both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. What had begun as a devastating mistake had evolved into an opportunity for meaningful work, financial security for her mother's treatment, and the foundation for friendships that might last a lifetime. The evening sun was setting over the city as Sarah and Marcus returned to Elena's room to say goodbye. Elena was sitting up in bed, looking more alert and energetic than she had during their earlier visit. Sarah, before you leave, I want to give you something, Elena said, reaching into the drawer beside her bed. She pulled out a small, handmade card decorated with colorful markers and stickers. I made this for you while you were talking with Dad. Sarah opened the card to find a drawing of two hearts connected by a golden thread, with the words, "Thank you for saving my life," written in Elena's careful handwriting. Inside, Elena had written a longer message about gratitude, hope, and the unexpected ways that people can touch each other's lives. Elena, this is beautiful, Sarah said, genuinely moved by the teenager's thoughtfulness. I'm going to keep this forever. As Sarah prepared to leave the hospital, she reflected on the extraordinary day she had experienced. She had arrived that morning as a struggling freelance designer facing financial ruin, and she was leaving as someone with the resources to ensure her mother's cancer treatment and the opportunity to build a meaningful career partnership. But more than the financial relief, Sarah treasured the human connections she had made. Elena's spirit and wisdom despite her young age had reminded Sarah of the resilience people could show in the face of medical challenges. Marcus's generosity had demonstrated how business success could be used to make a meaningful difference in other people's lives. As she rode the subway back to Brooklyn, Sarah looked at the check Marcus had insisted she keep, along with Elena's handmade card. Tomorrow, she would deposit the money and call her mother's oncology team to discuss accelerating Linda's treatment schedule. She would also begin researching Rivera Tech Industries, preparing to contribute her design skills to a company that was developing technology to help other families facing medical crises. The billing error that had devastated Sarah just weeks earlier had ultimately led to something far more valuable than financial security. It had connected her with people who understood the preciousness of health, the importance of family, and the potential for strangers to become allies in life's most difficult moments. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus as her train pulled into her station. Thank you for today. Elena hasn't stopped talking about you. Looking forward to working together. She typed back quickly. Thank you for everything. Looking forward to helping families like ours get the care they need. As Sarah walked through her familiar neighborhood toward her small apartment, she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes life's most devastating mistakes can become doorways to unexpected blessings. Her accidental payment had saved Elena's life, and Elena's grateful family had now provided Sarah with the means to save her mother's life in return. The next morning would bring new challenges as Sarah navigated the complexities of accepting such extraordinary generosity and beginning a business relationship with someone from a completely different world. But tonight, for the first time in months, Sarah would sleep peacefully, knowing that her mother's medical care was secure and that her own future held possibilities she had never imagined. Absorbed the full impact of what he was telling her. Despite her own financial crisis, she seemed genuinely moved by Elena's story and relieved that the accidental payment had served such a crucial purpose. "I'm so glad your daughter is okay," Sarah said sincerely. "But I have to be honest with you. My mother is fighting cancer, and that money was supposed to pay for her treatment. I'm happy it helped your family, but we're in a desperate situation now." As Sarah explained her mother's cancer diagnosis and their current financial struggles, Marcus felt a growing respect for her strength and dignity. Despite facing overwhelming medical costs on a freelancer's income, she spoke about her challenges without self-pity or bitterness. She clearly loved her mother deeply and was determined to do everything possible to ensure Linda received proper treatment. "Sarah," Marcus said when she finished speaking, "what you did for my family, whether intentional or not, was extraordinary. You saved my daughter's life. I want to repay your $50,000, and I want to do more than that." The conversation that followed would establish the foundation for a relationship that neither of them could have anticipated. As Marcus learned more about Sarah's background, her work as a graphic designer, and her devotion to her mother, he began to see someone whose character and values aligned surprisingly well with his own. Sarah's initial wariness about accepting help from a wealthy stranger was understandable, but Marcus could see that her pride was wrestling with her practical need for financial assistance. She asked thoughtful questions about his motivations and seemed determined to understand whether his offer came from genuine gratitude or some kind of obligation he felt pressured to fulfill. "Why do you want to help us beyond just returning the money?" Sarah asked directly. "You don't know anything about us except that I made a mistake that accidentally benefited your family." Marcus paused, considering how to express feelings that he was still processing himself. "Because Elena is alive today because of your payment, accidental or not. Because I know exactly what you're going through with your mother's illness, and I have the resources to help. And because you seem like someone who would do the same thing if our situations were reversed." As the afternoon progressed, their conversation evolved from a formal discussion about financial restitution into something more personal. Marcus found himself sharing details about Elena's personality, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and her determination to live fully despite her medical challenges. Sarah talked about her mother's strength during the cancer treatments, her own struggles as a freelance designer, and her fears about the future. By the time they finished their second cups of coffee, Marcus had made a decision that would surprise even David Kim. He wasn't just going to repay Sarah's $50,000. He was going to ensure that her mother received the best possible cancer care, regardless of cost. Elena's life had been saved by Sarah's accidental generosity, and Marcus intended to honor that gift in a way that would change both families forever. Agent. "But, Sarah, I need you to understand what your accidental payment meant to my family. My daughter Elena was having emergency heart surgery. She's 15 years old, and we've been waiting for a donor heart for over 2 years." The weight of his words settled between them. Sarah realized she had inadvertently played a role in saving a teenager's life, though she'd had no knowledge of the situation at the time. "The surgery was successful," Marcus continued, "but our insurance had reached its lifetime maximum. We were facing the possibility of financial ruin, or worse, having to delay critical post-operative care. When that payment appeared on our account, it felt like a miracle." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she understood the full impact of her mistake. While she had been devastated by the loss of her inheritance money, that same money had quite literally helped save a child's life. "I'm so glad your daughter is okay," Sarah said sincerely. "But I have to be honest with you. My mother is fighting cancer, and that money was supposed to pay for her treatment. I'm happy it helped your family, but we're in a desperate situation now." Marcus's expression grew even more serious as Sarah explained her mother's condition and their current financial crisis. She found herself sharing details about Linda's chemotherapy schedule, the mounting medical bills, and her own struggles as a freelance graphic designer trying to support them both. "Sarah," Marcus said when she finished speaking, "what you did for my family, whether intentional or not, was extraordinary. You saved my daughter's life. I want to repay your $50,000, and I want to do more than that." The conversation that followed would reshape both of their lives in ways neither could have predicted. As the afternoon sun slanted through the coffee shop windows, two strangers began building the foundation of a relationship that would prove that sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most unexpected circumstances.